Virginia Tech returns from its COVID pause and hopes to pick up where it left off. UVA suffers back-to-back road losses that have some doubting the Who's heading towards March. And the Atlantic 10 shuffles its late-season plans, maybe at the expense of Richmond. All that and who's the leading candidate for ACC Player of the Year this week on Teel and Barber. Welcome in to episode 42 of Teel and Barber, the Richmond Times-Dispatch and Richmond.com's ACC, Virginia Tech, and UVA sports podcast. I'm Mike Barber, ACC beat writer for the paper, and joining me here as always, my co-host, the 13-time Sports Writer of the Year and the Virginia Sports Hall of Famer, Mr. David Teel. David, how are you?
I'm okay, Mike. I must confess, though, although as much as I try to bring the happy vibe whenever we do this, I'm a little down about today's news about Tiger.
Yeah, if you have not yet heard, Tiger Woods was in a fairly serious, apparently, car wreck. They needed the jaws of life to get him out. He's got multiple leg injuries. And David, this is, no matter what Tiger's doing on the course, he is the story in golf. This is, you're right, a bummer.
It really is. He is a once-in-a-lifetime talent. I've been blessed to write about and witness some of the greatest athletes of our time, and he is right up there. He is riveting. And whenever he's on the leaderboard, he is must-see TV, at least in my household, and just some of the greatest sports moments of the last 25 years have come courtesy of him, and just wish him nothing but the best. He was trying to come back and be ready for the Masters, but he had back issues, and now this. At this point, you just hope he can be a daddy to his two kids.
Yeah, this certainly sounds serious. And Tiger's story, his story, his background, his relationship with his dad, everything kind of to overcome to get where he got, that by itself was this great sports story. And then for him to become arguably or definitely one of the best golfers of all time. Some put him at the top of the list, but he's certainly up there. That became a story that sort of carried itself and was such an amazing sports story. And then the comeback. Mm-hmm. I would argue the comeback of all of the amazing Tiger stories, his comeback might have been maybe the most improbable. And now this setback, and we don't want to speculate, but it certainly sounds to the point that it can endanger any more golf going forward. And like you said, it's, what will quality of life be, for somebody who's dealt with back issues, leg issues, knee issues, and now something so much more serious.
Yeah. You just hope the best. And, he had just gotten into playing some tournaments with his son, mm-hmm. and that was such a cool thing to see. So yeah, you just hope that he can get back on the course and knock it around just a little bit to be with his kids.
David, are you a golfer? Do you play any?
I used to play a lot, but I soon found that I had neither the time nor the patience. And then I just decided the heck with it.
I'll tell you, because I love it. I am not a good player at all and have not played since before the pandemic. So that tells you how committed I am to becoming a better player. But I always enjoyed it. At Virginia Tech, they have that course that they've shortened now. It's a 9-hole course. And in the days when, Frank Beamer was coaching and you were able to watch the first 2 or 3 periods of practice, and then you had about an hour and a half before you came back for interviews. I used to go take in the first period or 2 of practice and then shoot across campus, across the duck pond, play the 9 holes, and then shoot back in time to do the interviews. So it's a game that I hope to get back to, and more importantly, that we hope Tiger can get back to. Now, on the front of the basketball, which is the season we're kind of focused on, David, let's start out with the Virginia Cavaliers. And, they had been atop the ACC standings really since starting league play. They won their first 7 games, and they were the team to beat in the ACC. But last week, back-to-back road losses at Florida State, at Duke, it dropped them to second place in the standings, not the end of the world, but it raised a lot of questions about this team, what it's built for, how it fares against better competition. Really, it raised the question, how good are the Who's? I asked Tony Bennett about that on Monday.
Hard to say, I mean, we've played some good basketball. Even at the Duke game, I thought we played solid. I mean, that was a well played game, both teams, and they made some plays down the stretch, and it could go either way. We've been in a lot of close games, the Georgia Tech, NC States. All I know is all you can control is you get your team as best as possible. It's so disjointed with where you play, who you play, when you play them on the road, other teams playing more games, less games, not going. So it's so hard to say for anybody. We had to go on the road, and I don't know how much that matters. Florida State, they took it to us. Duke and Virginia Tech, and others are close. Those are good teams. I think we're getting a feel for ourselves, but honestly, I don't know if anybody can say, I got a great picture. This is who we are. We don't think we're too good, but we believe when we play right, we can be good.
David, so Tony can't quite nail down just how good this team is. How about you? Do you have a good sense of what we have in this year's Virginia basketball team?
Heck no. If he doesn't, I sure don't. But, you mentioned back-to-back road losses. Florida State's the most talented team in the league. And UVA ran into a buzzsaw in Tallahassee on Monday night and lost by 21 points. Mm-hmm. And sure, that's a bad look. When you get run like that, they got it to 7 at one point in the second half, but clearly the Seminoles were the better team, and I think would be the better team if they were playing best of 7. And then Saturday night at Cameron, that was a desperate opponent that UVA ran into. If Duke wants to reach the NCAA tournament for a 25th consecutive time, it virtually had to win that game. And when the Blue Devils did, albeit by 1 point.
David, correct me if I'm wrong. Tell me if you agree with this. If the schedule had not had those games back to back, we wouldn't be making as big a deal. Now, the Florida State, because of the margin, yes. The 1 point loss at Duke, as Duke seems to be putting it together, it's just the fact that they came consecutively that really has us panicking, isn't it?
Well, I wouldn't. Maybe has fans panicking, and that's fine. That's what they are wired to do. But yeah, back to back is part of it, and also just some of the defensive issues that have come up in those two games, again, against quality opponents with good players on the offensive end. But yeah, you just wonder, how far can this team go?
Yeah, I mean, the concern, I think, is you have the San Francisco loss. That's a bad loss, but it was early in the year. Things were kind of disjointed. But their best opponents that they've faced, they've lost to, right? Gonzaga, yep. Not competitive. Florida State, not competitive. We'll see where Duke ends up. Virginia Tech, that was a pretty lopsided win for the Hokies, although Virginia started that game well. What's the best win on this UVA resume? Is it Carolina? Is it Clemson? Is it the 2 wins over Georgia Tech? What win impresses you the most?
I would probably say Clemson. Although being Georgia Tech twice by season's end may look quite impressive, and Carolina could end up as the 3rd or 4th place team in the league come mid-March. But right now, I would say Clemson, if only because it was so emphatic. Yes, the Carolina win was as well, but the Clemson margin was 35? So, something along those lines, and it was a complete dismantling. So that's where I'd lean.
Now, as we look at the rest of the way, and I think it's a little bit of sports talk radio, because Virginia is going to finish in the top 2 or 3, certainly, of the ACC. It's going to be in the NCAA tournament. It's got a good shot to be maybe a 3 seed in the tournament, maybe higher if it puts together a run in Greensboro. So I don't know that there's any concern here, David, or is there? Or is there work left to do for UVA, or is this team kind of sitting pretty until we see what it can do in the tournament?
No, I think there is work to do, and Tony Bennett would tell you that, especially on the defensive end. In the 2 losses last week, Mike, to Florida State and Duke, Virginia allowed a combined 27 transition points. That's virtually unheard of against the Cavaliers because they are so good at getting back and getting that defense set. And they were not in those two games. And that is absolutely a concern. And then on the offensive side, what Tony Bennett explained to us on the ACC Zoom yesterday, and that fans can see as well, is that defenses are really locking down on Sam Hauser and Jay Huff, as well they should, and especially in Duke's case, Trey Murphy. The fact that Trey Murphy did not attempt a shot in the final 33 minutes at Cameron after having had 2 shots in the first couple of minutes, to me was one of the most interesting aspects of that game. And I credit Wendell Moore. He played outstanding defense. And what teams are doing is they are telling Kihei Clark, let's see if you can beat us, if you can finish, if you can shoot over length. And he took 15 shots the other night against Duke. That's not a good number for UVA.
Yeah, it's interesting because I know fans bang on Kihei. He's a great player. He wishes he was taller, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if he was a bigger guy, yeah, he could finish more. But to me, Kihei Clark is at his most effective when he's getting to the rim and finishing in a couple big spots, not that being the offense. Now, with that being said, when opposing teams make that their defensive game plan, David, is there a solution here? Is there an answer? Or does it just come down to Kihei Clark's got to find a way to finish over bigger guys, or they're never going to force teams out of that defense?
Well, it's a combination. They're going to have to do more. As Bennett was saying yesterday, he needs to figure out some ways to move Huff, Hauser, and Murphy around more to get them free from what opponents are doing. He's going to need somebody like a Casey Morsell to do some things off the dribble when he comes off the bench. They were without Thomas Woldetensae against Duke because of contact tracing, and will be again. We're recording this Tuesday afternoon and will be again tomorrow night against North Carolina State. So that's another element or component of the offense that Virginia will have moving forward that should help.
Yeah, I think the guy you mentioned there, Casey Morsell, is the most intriguing to me. He doesn't look like he's made the advancement that maybe people were hoping this year, but he's got moments, David, where he pulls up and hits a shot, a mid-range shot, which is so hard to defend. To me, that's exactly what's missing. If he can do that, if Trey Murphy can do that a little, that's going to force people to help off Huff and Hauser, because it's not, okay, Kihei's in the lane, let's see what he can do. But now there are these guys who can dribble, penetrate, and pull up and hit the mid-range shot. To me, that's the key for them to loosen up defenses, is they've got to show that ability from those guys. Reese Beekman, I don't know how much of his game that is, but those 3 guys putting the ball on the deck, starting to penetrate, but being able to pull up, hit that mid-range shot, I think that's really going to soften defenses, cause them to collapse back, and then you get Huff and Hauser going, and then we start to see what we thought we saw with this offense to start, which was inside, outside, driving, a lot of different weapons and versatility. Teams have kind of figured it out for now, and it's up to Tony Bennett to now answer that.
Yeah, I think Beekman's more of a slasher and probably isn't going to be that guy who has that, kind of mid-range game. But Murphy and Morsell, I think, fit that bill.
That would be huge. Now, that would be a thing that can get Huff and Hauser going. Speaking of Huff and Hauser, let's talk a little bit about the race for ACC Player of the Year. I asked Tony Bennett, I said, hey, Jay Huff and Sam Hauser are both having ACC first team kind of caliber years. Will they kind of split the vote in terms of people who think it's one of them? And he laughed and he said, maybe we can give them co-player of the year. Here. I don't think that's going to happen. Now, the preseason pick in the league was Garrison Brooks of North Carolina. I think he's had somewhat of a disappointing season, maybe a bit pedestrian. He's been good on the glass for them, but maybe not the inside scoring threat that people thought he would be. The front runner has to be Pitt's Justin Champagnie, because he's leading the conference in scoring. He's leading the conference in rebounding. He's averaging, David, a double-double, 18.8 points, 11.4 rebounds per game. Is he the guy to beat?
Yeah, I think so. Not many guys are going to lead the league in scoring and rebounding and not win ACC Player of the Year. It's happened a couple times way back when, but certainly not recently. And he has faded some late, and he may not end up leading the ACC in scoring. I think his edge in rebounding is such that he can coast to the finish line there. But Matthew Hurt of Duke, I think, is probably decent money to pass Justin Champagnie in the ACC scoring race.
Yeah, and with Duke surging, that makes him an interesting candidate for Player of the Year, because people are going to say, okay, how did your team do? Now, I think Pitt's been maybe better in some ways than expected, not consistent, but so much of this season, I just don't know how much of a knock we can use inconsistency, because everybody's had it. But I think with Duke's surge, that could certainly bring Hurt back to the front of that race.
Yes, and Hurt leads the league. And it all comes down to how many field goals you've attempted, and the statistical things get kind of nuanced. But his shooting percentages are really good. And Virginia found out the other night just how good he can be. They just really had no answer for him. And he continued to play well last night, as did Duke, in throttling Syracuse on a short turnaround. So I think Hurt is surging at the right time.
That makes sense. Now, there are some other candidates out there, and maybe they're more first-team all-conference guys, but Carlik Jones, the Radford transfer, with his scoring, the role he's played at Louisville, he and Jose Alvarado at Georgia Tech are the only players in the league who are in the top 10 in scoring and assists. I think they're guys to watch. Those teams have been very good, depending if you put much stock in that. And then, speaking of Champagnie leading the league in points and rebounds, there's only 3 players in the league that are in the top 10 of both those categories. It's Champagnie, it's Georgia Tech's Moses Wright, and it's Virginia Tech's Keve Aluma, who about a week or two ago started to get some traction in the Player of the Year race. David, how do you see his case and what he's meant to the Hokies?
Well, there's no question what he's meant to the Hokies. The only problem for Keve Aluma right now is out of sight, out of mind, and it's recency bias. That's how we humans are wired, and we just haven't seen him in so long. And much the same with Carlik Jones until the other night at North Carolina, when Louisville came off its pause. And when those guys go away for 2+ weeks, you just kind of lose sight of them, and oh yeah, that's right, I forget. You don't forget about them, but they're just not on your radar every night.
Yeah, I mean, Keve Aluma before the break was averaging 15.7 points per game. That's first on the team. 7.6 rebounds. That's first on the team. He leads the team with 25 blocks and has been really good on the defensive end. He's a good passer. He's got 36 assists.
Very good passer
in those 18 games. That's third on the league, coming from a big guy who often is getting the ball with them wanting him to score or shoot. So he's been a great all-around player, perhaps with a surge here at the end. Can he get himself back up to the top of that race?
I don't know about the top of the race. I think he would have a pretty remote chance at Player of the Year in the league. First team All ACC, I certainly think, is doable. But, I mean, to me, you're looking at one of the Virginia players, Champagnie, Hurt, and I'm really, really big on Jose Alvarado. And we'll see him tonight when Georgia Tech plays at Virginia Tech. But you mentioned how he and Carlik Jones are the only 2 who are among the top 10 in scoring and assists. Well, Carlik Jones barely shoots 40%, and he shoots less than 30% beyond the arc. Jose Alvarado is shooting over 50% from the floor, over 40% beyond the arc, over 80% at the free throw line. And oh, by the way, I think he's the best defensive player in the league.
Yeah, you've been high on Georgia Tech since the start. You've been high on Alvarado since the start. The inside-out combination they have with Alvarado and Wright, man, they've been in a lot of close games, and some close ones with UVA that we've seen.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see, and obviously we don't know. We'll get into Tech here in a second with them coming off the break, Virginia Tech that is, but it'll be interesting to see that matchup. But I think Georgia Tech those are some games that, think about Virginia's resume. I think when the year's over, we're going to think, okay, those Georgia Tech wins were pretty good. That Duke loss, not so bad, because for some of the players and reasons we're talking about, I think those teams are surging. Now, we both kind of agree, and it's played out, that Florida State, top to bottom, is probably the best team in the conference. David, we didn't mention a single player from Florida State as we recapped the odds and the favorites for Player of the Year. What does that say about what Leonard Hamilton's built there, its program, the balance of that team?
It's a sequel to last season, right?
Yeah, sure is.
The Seminoles won the regular season in 2020, and nary a first-team All-ACC pick. Devin Vassell made second team. I believe he was the 7th leading vote getter overall, and I think it could be very similar this season, although I'm certainly going to consider MJ Walker. I think he's their most complete player and arguably their most important one, just in terms of leadership and just all around play. Scotty Barnes clearly has the most pro potential, and in all likelihood is a one and done guy and is headed for the NBA lottery. But if a Florida State guy is going to crack first team and maybe that Player of the Year conversation, it would be MJ Walker.
Yeah, it's interesting because I do think Florida State is constructed in a similar way as last year, but the talent is up. I mean, it's like what Leonard Hamilton's been doing, but with better players. I mean, you mentioned Barnes. I think Walker's development, Raquan Gary. I think the job. Gray, the job he's done. And these are guys that have gotten better and better and better. I think this is the most talented team Leonard Hamilton has had in a while, and it's still deep and athletic and all the things that they build for. And it's why we thought this last year and things got cut short. I think we think this year. It's kind of built for tournament success when it has that kind of depth.
Absolutely. And I'm sure that few programs were as disappointed at the cancellation of last season's NCAA tournament as Florida State. That was a team that absolutely could have made some noise. And Mike, I know you're high on this group. Let's not forget there were 2 Seminoles in the top 11 of the NBA draft last year in Vassell and Patrick Williams. So yeah, he had some dudes last year too.
He's really elevated that program on that front in a way that, it's interesting because, like I said, he built it on depth, right? He built it on depth, athleticism, almost those hockey style line changes where guys are just coming in and it's a fresh wave of skaters, and the other guys are clutching their shorts, and here come 5 more. And now it just seems like the last couple of years that wave, that second wave, and sometimes third wave that comes off that Florida State bench, I mean, they are all guys who can really play. And it's an intriguing team, and I hope they get their chance this year to show us what they might be able to do in the postseason. Now, Keve Aluma, who we talked about, he's a big reason that the Hokies are still in the race with Florida State, with UVA. They're third in the conference. But as you alluded to, they haven't played in over 2 weeks.
Yeah.
They've been on a COVID-19 pause basically since that February 6 overtime road win at Miami. 2 games against Florida State and a game against Carolina wiped out.
Hate that. Wanted to see those games,
right?
Man.
The opponents we were most really intrigued to see them play, although they still have the UVA rematch. So if you had asked me for the 5 games I want to see Tech play this year, I think 3 or 4 of them at this point have been wiped off the schedule, which is frustrating. They get back on the floor, as you mentioned, tomorrow night. We're recording this Tuesday. Tonight, we're recording this Tuesday, tonight against Georgia Tech. A number of the other ACC coaches who dealt with the pauses talked about how hard it is, not just getting your players back onto the floor and back being allowed to play, but getting them back into game shape to run the floor. And I asked Virginia Tech coach Mike Young about that on Monday.
I can see it. We don't scrimmage a lot. We're working on stuff, and certainly this time of year, we don't get up and down the floor. We don't. There's not a lot of contact in practice, but had to rethink that. And we have, we scrimmaged. We probably scrimmaged 3-4 minute games, so it's a legitimate game, tie score, just to get them up and down. Concerned about it tomorrow, I am. But they are big, strong, healthy people, and we got to get back on the floor, Mike, is the bottom line. We got to get back on the floor.
David, they get back on the floor. What are we expecting to see against, as was mentioned, a really good Georgia Tech team?
You just don't know. But I think, Mike, Virginia Tech has a little bit of an advantage here. All these pauses are not the same. Some of these teams, such as Clemson, such as Richmond, such as Louisville, they've been on complete shutdown. Nobody practicing, nobody's in solo workouts, and that really, really hamstrings you. Virginia Tech's been able to practice. Now, we don't know who's been practicing, but they've had 4, 5, 6 guys able to practice at the same time. And unless anything has changed, what Mike Young had previously told us was it's not like the virus has ravaged the roster. This was someone else in the Tier 1 group, and all the players, or some of the players, were affected by contact tracing. So that's a difference too. The players haven't been sick. And whereas, Chris Mack at Louisville had the virus, several of his players had the virus. And then, look what happened to the Cardinals at Carolina the other night. They lose by 45?
Oof, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was tough to look at. You just felt badly for them because when the Tar Heels get it in gear and transition, they're going to make anybody look that way. So I think Virginia Tech, at least from everything we know, we don't know all the details, but from what we've been told about this particular pause, I don't think the effects will be as dramatic as we've seen with other programs.
Yeah, it's an interesting standard we apply now because in a normal year, if I told you that Virginia Tech only had 5 or 6 guys in practice to get ready for an ACC game and just got up to 9 here, in the past few days, and they'll have a roster to compete tonight, but who knows how many of those guys have been in and out. You would think that's a disaster in this COVID year. That actually doesn't sound that bad. They may be a little bit ahead of the curve. You mentioned that that Louisville Carolina game, kind of the worst case scenario, right? Of what can happen to a team, because Louisville had its full roster for that game, but those guys they were a little bit out of shape. They were a step slow. They had no rhythm. It will be very interesting to see what this team can do. Mike Young mentioned, and Steve Forbes, who's a good friend of his at Wake Forest, mentioned chatting with him about it. The coaches who are dealing with it now have the advantage of hearing from the guys who dealt with it earlier. So I think Mike Young had a good idea, a good handle on what to expect, particularly in that conditioning area. We heard Brad Brownell from Clemson talk about that a lot, telling me on Monday that, something he didn't anticipate, guys hadn't been in defensive crouches during the break. So he has them doing defensive slide drills. They get in the crouch, and the next thing you know, he's got 3 or 4 guys dealing with a stiff back. Things like that to be aware of. I think Mike Young has the advantage now of hearing everybody else's horror stories. He's a smart guy, but we'll see. It'll be definitely interesting to see in this matchup tonight.
Yeah, it really will. And we don't know what's the status of Jalen Cone, who hurt his ankle down at Miami. Joe Bamisil came off the bench and relieved him admirably. The last we knew, Mike Young was telling us yesterday that Cone was using a splint on the ankle just out of precaution, and he was kind of coy about whether he would play tonight. We'll see. It certainly would be a boost for the Hokies to have that 6th man coming off the bench like that.
And it would be nice just to get him back in the flow as you head towards the ACC tournament. Speaking of conference tournaments, the A-10, they've jumbled their schedule. They are cutting the regular season short. They've moved the conference tournament up, and they've moved some of the sites for where the semifinals and finals are going to be played. Didn't sit great with Chris Mooney, the coach at Richmond, or John Hart, his athletic director. For one, the move cancels Richmond's big rematch with rival VCU, a game that I think we were both really looking forward to. It also moved the tournament semis and championship away from the Robbins Center, moved those dates to the Siegel Center, VCU's gym, and then also Dayton. David, why did they make this move, and does it make sense?
I don't know, and I'm not sure. And it's really peculiar, Mike. Keep in mind, the A10 announced on January 28th that it was moving the tournament from New York to Richmond. Dual sites, Robbins Center, Siegel Center. Okay, great. And at that point, we already knew what the NCAA tournament testing protocols were going to be, that you had to have 7 consecutive negative tests, but the tournament was still going to be at its regular dates, going March 11 through 14 and ending on Selection Sunday with the championship game. And that was going to be at Robbins Center and or Siegel Center. I forget which one. And then last Thursday night, 3 weeks later, in a after-hours news dump, it's like, remember what we said 3 weeks ago? Never mind. We're going to play the championship game in Dayton. And oh, by the way, that's going to be the same date on Selection Sunday, but we're moving the rest of the tournament up a week, keeping it in Richmond and scrubbing the last week of the regular season. Well, if this was such a good idea now, why wasn't this done on January 28th? What changed? And no one's been able to explain that to me. And if I'm VCU, if I'm Ed McLaughlin and I'm Mike Rhodes, I am smoking hot about this because that game at Richmond in the regular season finale, that's a quad 1 game for the Rams because of its location. It was a quad 2 game played at the Siegel Center last week. It was a quad 1 game played at the Robbins Center. And now that opportunity is lost. And VCU doesn't have a quad 1 win yet. And I asked Mike Rhodes about it yesterday, and his 2-word answer was, it stinks.
Yeah, and John O'Connor, our colleague at the Times-Dispatch, he asked Chris Mooney, and Chris pointed out exactly what you're saying. For a league that wants to get as many at-large chances as it can have, he says it's going to hurt the league's chances. That's a great example. David, is he right that overall this hurts teams in the league that are trying to earn that at-large resume?
I think it does.
Yeah.
Now, the A10's rationale, John talked to Bernadette McGlade, the A10 commissioner, and her explanation was, in part, and I'm paraphrasing, that by moving the early rounds of the tournament back a week, that gave teams more of a runway to meet NCAA testing protocol. Okay, but then I go back to my other point. The NCAA testing protocol is not new. And oh, by the way, Bernie is on the committee. She's on the basketball committee. We're not plowing new ground here. Why did it all of a sudden become a good idea? Now, moving the title game to Dayton, I get that part of it because Dayton's only a couple-hour bus ride from Indianapolis. Those teams, the winner of that gets the A10 AQ to the tournament, and hopefully for the A10, the loser of that game is also getting an at-large. They're not going anywhere. They're going to go straight from Dayton to Indianapolis. That's a convenience thing. So I get that. But again, you knew that 3 weeks ago. Why now? And no one's explained that.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense other than sitting down and saying, ooh, our plan isn't that good. Here's a better plan, which, hey, I mean, I guess in this crazy COVID year, if you want the option to rethink things and come up with a better plan, I guess it should be supported. It stings for us here in the Richmond area because that VCU Richmond rematch, something we were really looking forward to, David. You saw them play the first time, seeing them play again. How much were you looking forward to that one?
Well, I wanted to see them at full strength.
Yeah.
I mean, because the first game was Richmond coming off another extended pause. And it was a fun game, but, you know, the Spiders just faded late. They had no legs. And VCU scored the game's final 7 points. I think Richmond missed like 14 of its final 15 shots. I mean, and everything was front rim. And VCU just had more gas. And hello, of course VCU had more gas. That wasn't surprising. But I really wanted to see them, in a fair fight.
Maybe we get that fair fight in the conference tournament.
Absolutely.
Be a great matchup, be a lot of fun, and be a lot of fun for the city of Richmond. And that also brings us to this week's edition of Take It or Leave It.
Thank you, Mike. It is Take It or Leave It. Both the Rams and the Spiders will reach the NCAA tournament this year. Take it or leave it. And let's start with David.
Guys, I'm going to leave it. Just I was looking at their profiles before we started this, and it's going to be dicey. I think both could make it, but VCU's sitting there at 35th on the net, which, by the way, is one spot ahead of Virginia Tech. And the Hokies are clearly in the tournament. But as we mentioned earlier, VCU does not have a quad one win. For a while, the Utah State win was, but Utah State has since fallen out of the top 50. That's now quad two. The Rams are 7-0 against quad two. That's excellent, but 0-3 against quad one. They've got a couple unsightly losses, including this past Saturday at home to George Mason. The big issue with VCU, what's going to happen with Bones Highland? Again, we're recording this. It's 4:36, kids, on Tuesday afternoon. The Rams in St. Louis tip it off at the Siegel Center in less than 90 minutes, and an immense game for both teams. For St. Louis, that's a Q1 chance. For VCU, it's Q2. Bones Highland will not play. We do not know his status for Saturday's regular season finale at Davidson. He hurt that foot the other day, and all the tests came back negative. But when can he play? We don't know. VCU conversely Richmond conversely is 58 on the net, but has two Q1 wins, one over Loyola of Chicago and one over Kentucky, but has a Q4 loss at home to LaSalle. It plays St. Louis on the road Friday. That is another extra large game.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, I think for both of these teams, it's going to come down to what we were just talking about, the conference tournament. I think both will make it. I do think they'll both get it done. In most of the projections you look at, Richmond appears somewhere in the last four in, first four out, somewhere in that range. I think the Spiders will get it done. I think VCU will get it done. But you mentioned huge games this week, missed opportunities with this change in the schedule. I think it's going to come down to, I was about to say Brooklyn, but that's not the case this year.
Right.
I think it's going to come down to what they can do in the A10 tournament. And I think, David, you hit on a good point that, with Bones Highland and with some of these pauses, and I'd like to see them both get into the A10 tournament in pretty close to full strength, right? And give us their best shot. I think the best shot of VCU and Richmond, if we get it in the A10 tournament, I think that carries them to the NCAAs. And boy, that would be a lot of fun, right? To have all of these teams, Virginia Tech, Richmond, VCU, probably Liberty maybe Liberty there in Indianapolis. Potentially a really good year for basketball in the Commonwealth.
Don't forget James Madison.
James Madison having kind of the surprise season of the year in the CAA. Good point. Yeah. So it's just a fun year in basketball, despite all of the parts of this year that aren't fun. The Commonwealth has given us a lot to pay attention to. David, before we go, a couple of ACC coaches gave us some things to pay attention to, if you will, in the past week. Let's start with Josh Pastner, who blew up my Twitter feed by saying that he thinks 11 teams from the ACC should make the NCAA tournament every year. Now, I'm assuming that's a bit of hyperbole, and his point is just how much talent and great coaching's in the league. But David, what did you make of Josh Pastner saying 11 of the 15 teams in the ACC should be in the big dance every year?
Josh needs decaf. He truly does. I like Josh a lot, but he goes over the top on many subjects, and he is way over the top on this one.
Yeah, Josh's kind of trademark on the teleconference, which he's great on. He's really engaging, entertaining. He even came on once when they were playing a game, came on game day, which most coaches pass on that option. So he's great to us, but he loves to tell us which coaches belong in the Hall of Fame, which are going to the Hall of Fame, who should have a statue, who should have a court named after them. He's effusive in his praise of his coaching counterparts, and I'm sure they appreciate that. But yeah, maybe a bit much. And certainly, I think if you look at the standings this year, 11th place would be Notre Dame. And I think even Mike Bray would tell you that he probably doesn't have an NCAA tournament caliber team this year. So a little over the top.
Mike, you mentioned Josh coming on the ACC Zoom on game day a couple of weeks ago, which is unprecedented. He also one day came on while he was driving, which probably wasn't a great idea. But that's only the second best Georgia Tech coach appearance on what back then was just the ACC teleconference, because one year there was this odd background noise and Bobby Crimmins was on the call and Brian Morrison was the moderator. And he's, "Coach, where are you?" "Brian, I'm in the hot tub."
Oh, man.
and Bobby Crimmins, bless his heart, one of the great all-time coaches and characters in this conference. And having actually interviewed Bobby Crimmins one time in the sauna at Alexander Memorial Coliseum, I can just picture him calling in to the ACC media interviews from a hot tub.
So Josh Pastner, if you're listening, that's your next challenge, is get into the ACC call in your hot tub or your pool. I often do that call from my treadmill, but all I have to do is dial down the speed a little bit when I ask my question, and then nobody realizes that I'm doing my poor excuse for a workout for the day while I'm on the call. Now, on a much, less positive note, Chris Mack from Louisville, a video circulated of him celebrating at a party at his house, maskless with some people, including former Louisville football player Eric Wood, I believe, was there. David, what did you make of that, and what did you make of Chris's kind of apology for it this week?
Chris is an interesting guy, and whenever he gets out over his skis, it involves the University of Kentucky. And he did earlier this season in another video. It was that he tweeted out where he just mocked Calipari so badly, and it was hilarious. And I thought it was great, but it created some controversy down there because you just don't. Louisville, Kentucky basketball is like Auburn, Alabama football. I mean, those folks do not get along. And then for him to have celebrated Louisville's victory over Kentucky at a maskless party was something that he indeed himself admitted was, quote, not a good look, unquote.
Yeah, not a good look, but I got to say it, and I'm glad you brought it up. Other than the mask part, I love it. Right?
Yeah,
Other than the mask part and the discipline there and the message it sends about whether or not you're taking things seriously. But in terms of the ribbing Kentucky, in terms of the going after Calipari, maybe not a great move for Chris Mack, but boy, those of us who do this sports writing deal for a living, we love that stuff.
Oh, no question. And where I think Chris Mack gets in trouble with the maskless part is, if that was one of his players, there'd be hell to pay.
Right. Think about Louisville already booted, was it men's soccer
Yes.
players from the team for violation. So, yeah, it's just, I guess that's our message to Chris Mack then is put on a mask, but otherwise keep it up. Because other than that part, very entertaining. Well, we hope today's show was very entertaining. Thanks for listening. You can subscribe to Teel and Barber on Apple Podcasts or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. And please consider supporting local journalism with an online subscription to the TD. You can find special promotional offers available at richmond.com. Today's show was, of course, produced by Dean Hoffmeyer. Teel and Barber is a podcast of the Richmond Times-Dispatch and richmond.com. For David Teel, I'm Mike Barber. Thanks for listening. Be healthy and safe, and please join David and me again next week.